Hey everybody, it is Wednesday, April the 22nd, 2020. I had to look and cheat on what day it is because I've lost track of that. I've also lost track of how many days we are into this pandemic, how many days we are into the coronavirus stuff. I know we're 30 some odd days into it. We're over 5 weeks into doing church differently, and it's tough and not a fun thing, not an easy thing, but we're going to keep chugging along and keep doing it. If we were meeting normally in youth group tonight, we would have prayed for an unreached people group and also for a missionary or church planter. And the unreached people group that we were going to pray for tonight is the Dongjian people in China. If you know anything about China, there's not a lot of gospel influence, not a lot of Jesus there. So they definitely need prayer. And then the missionary or church planter is a friend of mine named Brent Sorrells. He's actually related to my friend Jonathan Whitlock. And they've worked with him there several times, and I went, my family did a few years ago and worked with them in the Plano, Texas area. He's actually moved recently back to Port Arthur, which is where he was before. Some circumstances caused them to move back there, but they're still doing the same thing. They're working with Vietnamese in Texas, first in the greater Dallas area, and now back in Port Arthur. So they need prayers as well as they transition. So let me pray. God, I thank you for the Dongjian people of China. I thank you that you love them and that you created them in your image. And I pray that there would be people to take the gospel to them, there would be people respond to the gospel, and that those people would share with those around them as well. I pray that you would reach many of them for you, and that you would send people to them, and that they would see a great awakening there. And I pray for Brent and his family as they transition back to Port Arthur. I thank you for the work that you've done through them in Plano, the work you did before in Port Arthur. And I pray that as they transition, that everything would go smooth with their kids, with their finances, with their move back into that area, that everything would go smoothly and that you would be honored and you would use them greatly. In Jesus' name, amen. So tonight we're in Luke chapter 9. So if you have a Bible, turn over to Luke chapter 9, verses 23 through 26. And we're going to do something tonight I'm going to call a dead man walking. And while you're turning over there, a couple of thoughts. This week is the anniversary of three really tragedies in American history. One was the Waco shooting, the Koresh cult shooting on the compound there in Waco in the early 90s. And then the mid-90s, there was the Oklahoma City bombing that took place in Oklahoma City at a federal building there. And then there was the Columbine shooting in the late 90s in the Denver area. All of those took place either on April 19th or 20th. And so while we're going through a hard time here, people around the world, or around our country rather, are remembering the anniversary of some really hard times that they've gone through. But in the midst of that, I read a story this week that brings a lot of hope and brings a lot of joy. Many of you may have played the game Candyland when you were a kid. I did, definitely. My kids have played it a lot. And it was actually created by a woman who was in the hospital with polio. And she realized that she had time on her hands and realized that a lot of kids were in there who were lonely and abandoned, feeling lonely, feeling abandoned. And so she decided to create something for them to entertain themselves and to play and have fun and use colors and all of that kind of stuff. And so that's where that came from. And she donated the proceeds, the profits from that, to charities helping with polio in hospitals and so forth. And so I read that. I thought that was a great story, a neat story, because we need hope right now. We need joy right now. So tonight we're going to look at a passage that really, to me, is the epitome of what it means to follow Christ, is the epitome of true Christianity, being a dead man walking, denying ourselves, taking up our cross, following Jesus daily. Luke 9:23 was on the wall of our old youth building. I love it so much. In fact, I think it's on the wall on a drawing that one of our students made over here. But I want to read from verse 23 through 26, so a short passage, and then we'll kind of pick it apart. Then he said to them all, "If anyone wants to follow after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life because of me will save it. For what does it benefit someone if he gains the whole world and yet loses or forfeits himself? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words, the Son of Man will be ashamed of him when he comes in his glory and that of the Father and his holy angels." So we're going to dig into that and talk about what that means as far as being a true believer, living out our faith and stuff like that. If we were meeting together normally, I would have played a video here. And it's a spoken word poem, and I've used it a time or two in the past, but it's a phenomenal spoken word poem called Almost Saved. And it's a great look at how so many people think they're saved, think they're right with God, but they're really just almost saved, which is not truly saved. And so tonight we're going to look at what it really means to be a follower of Christ. And the first thing I want you to see is this: come after means to become Jesus' disciple. It means to become a disciple, a real follower of him. It's not just praying a prayer. It's not just walking an aisle. It's not just joining a church or being baptized or saying you've done something, saying you've been converted. All of those things become rituals if we're not fully on board, if we're not fully following him. It's giving up anything and everything to walk in his way. It's giving up anything and everything to learn and live from the master, to live like him. If we aren't growing, if we aren't becoming a disciple, a true follower, are we really coming after him? Are we really doing what this passage says? So come after means to become Jesus' disciple. Second thing, deny self. Deny self means to turn control over to Jesus. There was a story that I read many years ago of a young hotel clerk who gave up his personal room. He lived in the hotel. He gave up his personal room for a man when the hotel was full. And this man made him a promise that he would reward him someday down the line. And later he fulfilled that by making this young desk clerk the manager of the very first Waldorf Astoria hotel in New York City. It was the man himself who created the Waldorf Astoria hotel chain, which is a massive chain of luxury hotels. This man selflessly gave up his room for him and was rewarded for it. We're naturally selfish people. We want to control everything. We want our rights. We want to be in control. We want to be pleased in the moment. We don't want to give up what we have. We don't want to give up our rights. But God calls us to daily die to self. Not just to die to self, but to keep doing it over and over again. Rather than being just one big heroic act of commitment, one walking the aisle, praying a prayer type thing, it's a daily dying to self. He wants us to follow him daily, to be broken, to realize that he is worth following, that it's worth giving ourselves to him alone. It's God's will over our own. So come after, deny ourselves. And then third is take up our cross. To take up our cross means risking persecution and death. In the Chinese Boxer Rebellion in the early 1900s, there were 100 imprisoned Christians who were brought out, and a cross was laid on the floor in front of them, and they were told, if you'll step on this cross and spit on it, then you can walk free. And the first 7 people walked up and did that, but the 8th person, a young girl, wouldn't do it, and so she was executed. She was shot with a firing squad. But what's cool is once she did it, the next 92 people, everyone after her, did the same. She was persecuted for her faith. The first 7 people were not willing to go all in for Jesus, but the rest of them were because of her boldness. My friend Mark Nix is the lead man for a band called Cool Hand Luke, and he shares a story on one of their albums, a live album, about a Colombian pastor who thought he was getting a visit to be told that he could meet publicly, and instead he was dragged out and beaten and then shot right in front of his wife and young children. His wife took his body, laid it up in front of a tree, put a Bible in it, and started preaching to everybody that came by, and people came to know Jesus because of her. We don't know that type of persecution here in America. We don't know that type of trial here in America. But we take up our cross. It means going all in. It means in Jesus' day, crucifixion was this horrible death that was made into a public spectacle. Everybody was able to observe it. This dead man walking saw all of his earthly hopes fade away. Jesus asks us to crucify our sin, to get rid of it, to take up his cross, to take up the burden of following him. And it's going to bring splinters. It's going to be hard. The splinters that entails are going to be difficult. But the question that we have to ask ourselves is, are we willing to place ourselves on the altar as living sacrifices for God? That's what Romans tells us to do. Lay ourselves on the altar before God and be a living sacrifice. Martin Luther said, a religion that gives nothing, costs nothing, and suffers nothing is worth nothing. We will be persecuted. We have to crucify self. In fact, in Galatians 2:20, it says, I've been crucified with Christ. I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. Take up the cross means risking persecution and death. And then the next thing, following Jesus means imitating his example and his teaching. To follow Jesus means life change. To follow Jesus means our actions change, our thoughts change, our lifestyles change. We can either retreat into our nice, cozy, comfortable lives and communities and houses and all that kind of stuff and live decent lives hiding behind Christian cliches and catchphrases and all of that kind of stuff, or we can decide that Jesus is worth more than that. What if Jesus is worthy of more than a Christian spin on the American dream? What if Jesus created us for more? What if we determined to give him all? What if we cared that much about the 1 billion+ people who have never even heard of Christ? What if we cared that much about starving, suffering, dying people that are dying across the world every single day? What if we made that type of commitment? That's what he's asking of us. Following Jesus means imitating his example and obeying his teaching. Following Jesus means going with Jesus and staying with him. It's a decision to pick up our lives and go with him, but we stay with him all the time. It's an everyday, all the time decision to go all the way with him at whatever cost, to go all the way for him at whatever cost. Will we count the cost and find him worth it? Will we take up our cross daily, deny ourselves, and follow him? Are we willing to go that far for him? Are we willing to follow him completely? Jesus makes it clear that the cost is great, that it's not some easy lifestyle. It's not glamorous. It means surrendering our lives, our families, our positions, our jobs, everything that we have, our ambitions, our rights, our plans, losing all of that for Christ. letting go of security, letting go of safety, letting go of all of what we want for all of what he wants for us, letting go of our past, our present, and our future to give complete lordship to him. Toby Mack has a song that I would have played if we were doing this in real youth group called Lose My Soul. It says, I don't want to gain the whole world and lose my soul. And that's the next point, is that we lose our lives to find him. We lose our lives to find him. Verse 24 talks about this. Sir Edmund Halley, there's a comic called Halley's Comet. I remember when it came around a few years ago, in the mid-'80s, I believe. And it comes around once every 70 years or something like that. But what people don't know about him is that he did a lot of the grunt work. He influenced and encouraged and helped Sir Isaac Newton with some of his research on gravity and other principles, including book writing, that Newton gets the credit for. But he didn't mind that. He went largely unnoticed. He went unrecognized until after his death, but he didn't mind who got credit for it as long as the cause was being furthered and the information was being made known. And that's the kind of life that God asks of us. We're captivated by an American dream that tells us it's all about us, that our lives are consumed with dreams of success, security, safety, satisfaction, and all the world has to offer. But our purpose is not just to have some comfortable life, not just to have all that the world has to offer, not just to have some good career, decent family, easy retirement. We can hide behind our comforts, or we can decide Jesus is worth more and has created us for more. We can decide he's created us for a greater purpose. We can decide to die to self, die to dreams, die to our plans, allowing our hearts to be captured and conquered by a higher calling and ambition. Lose your life to find it. The next point is this: everything without Jesus is nothing. There's a man named John Wendell, and he and 5 of his 6 sisters inherited an estate worth over $100 million, but they lived miserly, hoarding lives, miserable lives in the same house. None of them ever married. The last one died with only one dress, one that she made herself and wore for 25 years. They had everything the world could have wanted, $100 million, and they wasted it. We can gain everything the world has to offer and still have nothing, and still find it useless without Jesus. To gain everything but Jesus is to gain nothing. To gain Jesus and nothing else is to find everything. Jesus is the treasure we're looking for. He's the prize. He's the fulfillment. He's the satisfaction. It's not Jesus plus anything. It's Jesus, period. He's the gain. He's the prize. He's the reward. He is what we're looking for. He is what we're chasing after. Without him, we can have everything this world has to offer and find that it's nothing. There's a song by a band called Caedmon's Call that says, this world has nothing for me, and this world has everything. Everything without Jesus is nothing. And then finally, in verse 26, it says, whoever's ashamed of me, I'll be ashamed before my Father and the angels in heaven. The decision to follow Jesus it has to be all in. Hiding our faith means it's probably fake. We're compelled to a radical commitment to God, a radical commitment to others. We're often tempted to give him less than he deserves. We indulge our own desires. We give him partial credit. We give him partial sacrifice, nominal commitment. We don't intentionally deny him. We don't intentionally deny our faith, hide our faith usually, but we're tempted to do it anyway, and we often do it anyway. And quite simply, if we're ashamed of him, he's ashamed of us, and our faith is not legitimate. Here's the thing, guys. The decision to follow Jesus has to trump all other life decisions, all other relationships. Will we decide we don't have time to play with games with God while billions suffer without God and without hope and die without him? Will we become a people who are tired of settling for casual, typical, comfortable, complacent, business-as-usual Christianity? Or will we be willing to sacrifice it all, our times, our gifts, our resources, our lives, our skills, our families, our relationships, to know him and make him known? That's what he's called us to do. If we were meeting together tonight, we would have closed with a song called Here's My Heart. And that's my invitation to you. Give him your heart. Give him your all. Deny yourself. Take up your cross daily. Follow him wholeheartedly. Give him everything. He gave everything for you. Let me pray for you guys. Father, I thank you for this time. I thank you for anybody who watches this giving up their time. And God, I pray for every single one of them to give themselves wholeheartedly to you. God, if that's a first-time commitment to salvation, help them to talk to me or somebody who can help them with that. God, if they know you but they're not walking with you, help them to give themselves wholeheartedly back to you. God, we don't want to gain the whole world and lose our soul. We want to go all in for you. We want to deny ourselves, take up our cross daily and follow you and give it all for you and make a difference in our world. I love you. I thank you. I pray for that type of commitment in my life, my family, my youth group, my church, my friends, and anybody else. Help us to go all in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Thanks for listening.